All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started with our lesson. Our lesson for today is about energy and photosynthesis. But before we actually start with the do nows or with anything, I want you to take a quick second and pause the video. You're going to need a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil, whatever writing utensil you choose. So go ahead and pause and get your materials, please. All right, thanks for coming back. I hope that you have a pencil and a writing utensil, sorry, a pencil and a paper. You're not going to need it just yet. I just wanted to make sure that before you got into the flow of the lesson, you were able to have all of the materials that you need. So let's get started with our do now. Jacori has 20 grams of baking soda and 50 grams of vinegar. Assuming that matter is conserved, what should the mass of the mixture be after he combines both substances? Do now number 2. Jacori combines the substances. He sees bubbles fizzing near the surface of the mixture. He takes the mass and sees that it's 62 grams. Does this final mass show conservation of matter? Why or why not? Do now number 3. Jacori tells Aaron that the substances before the reaction had a larger mass than the mixture after the reaction. Aaron says it weighs less because some of the molecules disappeared. Do you agree with Aaron? Why or why not? Use your knowledge of conservation of matter to support your answer. All right, let's go over our do nows. So for these ones, I'm actually going to show the question again at the top just so that we can remember what we were talking about. In our first example, we see that Jacori has 20 grams of baking soda and 50 grams of vinegar. We want to know that if matter is conserved, what should the mass of that mixture be? That means that we need to add both substances. We know that all the atoms that are there before the change should be there after, so we should be able to add up their masses. In this case, 50 plus 20 gives us 70 grams. And for number 2, Jacori combines the substances and sees bubbles fizzing near the surface. The final mass is 62 grams. It did not show conservation of matter because his mass of 62 grams was less than the initial mass of 70. And for number 3, we know that Aaron said that it most likely had a decrease in mass because molecules disappeared. We know that the law of conservation of matter tells us that matter cannot be created or destroyed. If it appears to change drastically, like if it appears to get a lot more, if you appear to have a lot less, that's usually a sign that a change in phase occurred. And we did see clues of that because if you remember, we saw bubbles fizzing near the surface. Whenever we see any bubbles, we know that a gas has been formed. So it looks like this reaction that Jacori did had some chemical change that created a gas. That gas escaped. And we know that gases are made of atoms and molecules. They have mass, so we lost some of the mass in that change. All right, so let's get into it. Energy and photosynthesis. We are now starting on new stuff. Yay! This is one of my favorite units because we get into photosynthesis, obviously, but we get into food chains, food webs, producers, consumers, decomposers, all this really fun life science stuff. There's a lot of really cool activities that come with this, a lot of really fun games that we're able to do online. But this lesson here is the building block of all of that. If you do not understand the energy and photosynthesis and how that works, it's really difficult to build upon this knowledge to figure out food chains, food webs, and how, different living organisms interact in ecosystems. So please make sure that we are paying close attention and that you have all of your materials that you will need for later. So energy. Whenever we think of energy, we think of movement, right? We think of maybe, a little brother or sister that's too hyper. But everything on Earth that's alive needs energy. We'll talk about how different things in different ecosystems get energy, but the main source of energy for all life on Earth is the sun. Now, I know that that might sound a little bit weird because the sun doesn't really do too much for us, in particular, other than really, give us a sunburn or make us feel hot. That's kind of how the sun's light and the sun's heat interacts with us. This is different, though, for plants. Plants are incredibly dependent on the sun, and we're going to go into why that is in just a second. But it has to do with this fancy new word that we have here that's called photosynthesis. Go ahead and say photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is the process that allows plants to make their own food and to grow. Plants are very different from you and me. You and I, obviously, whenever we're hungry, we go and we get some sort of snack, maybe a little bit more right now that we're in quarantine, but the way that we take in energy and food particles is very different from the way that a plant does it. Now, this is going to be a video of a seed growing over the course of 25 days. Now, there are two things that as you watch this video, it's going to take a little bit. It's going to be like a minute and 10 seconds. But as you watch this video, I want you to think of two things. Number one, what is changing? So look for anything that is changing throughout the video. But I also want you to try to figure out what is staying the same. There is something that does not change. That's a little bit less obvious, so make sure you're paying very close attention. So this is a close-up of the actual plant above the ground that's being produced. And this is the roots and the soil beneath the surface. Pay attention to both. Remember, we're trying to think of what is staying the same. And what is changing? This is a close-up of the roots. Again, even here, you can see what is staying the same and what is changing. All right, I'm going to pause it right there. So now that we've seen this whole video, I'm going to ask you these same two questions. You're going to pop your answers into the box that's about to come out. So first, what was changing? That's a little bit easier to answer. So I want to ask that first. What was changing throughout the whole video? And what was staying the same? So a little bit less obvious, but really think as you were seeing that time lapse from day 1 to day 25, what never changed? So one of the things that is very obvious that is changing is the size of the plant, right? We start with this super tiny little bean. Over the course of 25 days, we get this very large stalk that grew. Not just the stalk here, we have a lot of leaves and we have this very intense network of roots. So when we're thinking about what changed, we can say the size of the plant, the length of the roots, right? Everything basically about the plant changed. When we're talking about what stayed the same, nothing really about the plant stayed the same except that it's the same type of plant, right? We didn't start off with a bean plant and then end up with like a broccoli plant. So the type of plant stayed the same. But aside from that, if you notice, the soil never changed. Nobody came in and added more soil. Nobody came and took soil out. The amount of soil changed the amount of soil stayed the same. So if the amount of soil stays the same, we kind of need to start thinking of what exactly is the soil doing that's helping the plant to grow? And is it actually helping that much? So now we're going to take a quick read about photosynthesis. I will be reading this out loud to you. If you don't want me to do so, you can just mute it. If you want to read it on for yourself, it's fine. Just make sure that before the question pops up, you kind of turn the sound back on again in case I say anything right before. All right, a closer look at photosynthesis. Just like people, plants need food and water to grow and live a healthy life. However, how we think of food when talking about what plants need is much different than the food we eat. Plants need sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide from the air in order to make their own food. This process is called photosynthesis. A plant's leaves are where photosynthesis happens. Let's take a closer look at each of the three things needed for photosynthesis. This is a very nice diagram here about what photosynthesis looks like. So right now we're going to get two questions that pops up. That very first one is, what are the three things a plant needs for photosynthesis? And next, in what part of the plant does photosynthesis happen? All right, let's move on to our next section. Sunlight. Leaves are made up of millions of tiny cells. To see a cell, you need to look in a microscope. Each cell can have anywhere from 1 to hundreds of chloroplasts. Say chloroplasts. Inside each chloroplast is green chlorophyll, which is what gives leaves their green color. Chlorophyll is very important to photosynthesis because it is the part of the plant that takes in sunlight. So, very quickly, just because I know that was a lot of new information, chloroplasts are these small things that are in the cell, and inside each chloroplast is green chlorophyll. Basically, chlorophyll is like the color. We can think about it like that right now. And the chloroplasts are these little tiny things that are inside the larger plant cell. So, we already answered that. What are inside of the plant's cells that helps the leaves absorb sunlight? All right, next section. Carbon dioxide. When we breathe, we take in oxygen from the air and let out carbon dioxide. Plants are just the opposite. They absorb carbon dioxide and let out oxygen. Carbon dioxide is taken in by very small holes in a plant's leaves called stomata. Oxygen is released from the stomatas as well. So if you think about a leaf, there are these super teeny tiny holes that we can't always see. And what these holes do, just like it just explained, it lets in gases. So carbon dioxide is able to enter, and then after photosynthesis, oxygen can come out. Water. Water travels into the roots, up the stem, and to the leaves. Water mixes with the carbon dioxide and sunlight taken in by the plant's leaves. Sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water work together to make sugar or food. The plants use this food to grow. It also makes oxygen for people and animals to breathe. So what's really interesting is that after photosynthesis, we end up with two things. We end up with this sugar, which is basically the plant's food, and we end up with oxygen. So if we really want to look closely at what the process of here we go, really quick. We know that water is absorbed by the roots. Okay, so the roots take in water from beneath the surface and it goes up into the plant to the leaves where photosynthesis happens. But if we want to look at the whole picture of carbon dioxide, we have this very neat little equation here at the bottom. Carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight create sugar and oxygen. So how does a plant take in carbon dioxide? How does water reach a plant's leaves? What two things or products do plants make in photosynthesis? Okay, this next section is where you are going to need your pen and paper. So if you need to pause the video really quick to get your materials from next to you, go ahead and do that and then come back with all of your stuff. Um, so we've learned that physical and chemical changes conserve matter. Even when molecules change during a chemical reaction, the same atoms are still there, just arranged differently, right? That's knowledge that we're bringing in from our last lesson. We also know that plants cannot eat the same way that people and animals do. Instead, like we just read, plants take molecules and energy from their environments to do a chemical reaction called photosynthesis inside their plant bodies to make food for themselves. We've begun to explore these molecules in our video, and we've also read about them right now in our article. So we're going to combine all of that knowledge together to create a diagram. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to create a diagram. You are going to follow along as best you can. If you ever need to pause in order to just catch up, or in case I'm going too fast, please feel free to do so. Edpuzzle will let you pause. It just will not let you go forward, okay? All right, so let's get started. Ooh, really quick. So let's pretend that this is your whole paper. If you could leave this section at the top blank, there was something that I forgot to put into the diagram. So I just need you to leave this spot blank because we're going to write something here at the end. So maybe you can just have what we're drawing right now, maybe like 1.5 inches from the top of the paper. All right, now for reals, let's get started. So if you could go ahead and title your paper Photosynthesis. That's Photosynthesis. We're going to get started drawing the main components of our diagram. We're going to draw a line across that's going to represent our soil. And then out of our soil, we're going to have this tree growing. So our tree is going to represent our plant for this diagram. Again, my drawing is not the best, so we're just going to watch where this tree goes. After we draw the trunk of our tree, we're obviously going to need to draw this green section, which are the leaves. I'm actually going to go ahead then and draw a more, like a bigger leaf here. Well, in this case, it looks more like a balloon. Promise you the next one will be better. There we go. The reason that I'm drawing the leaves here is because I want it to be very visible that the leaves are one of the most important parts because that is where photosynthesis happens. And last, I'm going to go ahead and draw the sun in the top left corner. Remember, the sun is a very important piece of this. So as we go, what we're going to do is we're kind of going to do that same thing that happened towards the end of that article. We're going to write our little equation that they did at the end. So the very first piece of photosynthesis that we're going to talk about is carbon dioxide. So up here, I'm writing carbon dioxide just to have it completely spelled out for us. But on my diagram towards here, I'm actually going to write CO2. That's just the molecular formula for carbon dioxide. Now, as you can see, I have these wavy lines pointing into the leaves because that is how the carbon dioxide enters. Next, we are going to add the next piece, which is our water. So again, I wrote water up there. Down here, I'm writing H2O. That's just the molecular formula for water. And I'm drawing these arrows that point the water going up into the roots. That is what draws in the water into the plant. And last, we know that we need our sunlight or sun rays for energy. So I have my carbon dioxide in my water, and now I'm adding energy from the sun. We're going to talk a little bit more in detail about the sun in just a second, but I'm still going to add it to my equation because I still need it for photosynthesis. So let's talk about what's made afterwards. We know that we get two things, right? The very first one, actually, let's see if you can guess it. What gas is released after photosynthesis? If you guessed oxygen, or if you remembered oxygen, you are correct. So again, just like I did before, I'm writing oxygen up there, but next to my arrows, I'm writing O2. That's the molecular formula for oxygen. And we also get the food for the plant, which is one of the most important pieces, which is actually called glucose. Go ahead and say glucose. Glucose is basically just a fancy word for sugar, particularly the type of sugar that a plant needs in order to kind of feed itself and give itself energy. So that glucose is the food for the plant. If you notice, I don't actually have an arrow pointing, right? It's just like this little dot because the glucose, stays there. Now, there is one thing that we didn't talk too much about before that I really want to specify here. The sun. We know that we need the sun's rays or else photosynthesis can't happen. So as we label everything, right, we know that we need carbon dioxide, we need our sun, we need the water, we need our oxygen, right? Oh, sorry, we need that and we get our oxygen and then eventually our glucose. Carbon dioxide, water, glucose, and oxygen are all molecules. If you noticed, I said I'm giving you the molecular formula. These are all molecules. The sunlight gives us energy for photosynthesis to happen. Sunlight is not a molecule. So if I ever ask you, or if anyone ever asks you, what molecules do you need for photosynthesis? You should never say sunlight because they're asking you, what molecule do you need? Not just what do you need in general. If they're asking you for a molecule, they're specifically asking you about carbon dioxide or water. Sunlight, again, that's just the energy for it to happen. It's not a molecule. This is what my original diagram looked like. So just in case you need to add anything else. But the reason that I asked you to leave that blank space at the top is because I really like how we did this like equation, sentence equation here versus how we did it in the previous one because we kind of had to, oh darn, it's not going to show it. There we go. We kind of had to squish everything together. So at the top, if you still have that blank space, if not, just go ahead and turn your paper over. It's not a big deal. I want us to actually write it out the way that we have it. So water, comma, carbon dioxide, comma, and energy from the sun combine to make oxygen and glucose. Now I want you to notice that everything that is underlined is a what? What do you think? Everything that's underlined are the molecules. And energy is has a squiggly underline because it's not a molecule. Again, that's just the energy from the sun. So we know that CO2 enters through the leaves. Energy from the sun is also absorbed through the leaves. Water enters through the roots. And that glucose, that sugar, stays as food in the plant and it releases oxygen. And that's it. So let's go ahead and recap, which means that it's time for our major keys. Major key number 1. Plants use carbon dioxide and water molecules to create glucose and oxygen. We know that this process is called photosynthesis. Major key number 2. Glucose is a type of sugar used by plants in order to get energy and grow. This is a really big misconception that can happen. The sunlight doesn't directly transfer energy into the plant. The sunlight is the energy for photosynthesis that happens in the plant. So once photosynthesis happens and we get this lovely glucose, that glucose can then give energy to the plants. But photosynthesis is the only reason really that plant is able to get that glucose. And major key number 3. Sunlight is the energy that powers photosynthesis. It is not a molecule. Even if it says, again, what molecules are needed for photosynthesis, you would not answer sunlight. Sunlight is the energy. So our final discussion question. I want you to look at your diagram for photosynthesis that you created. Look at what you need to create it. Look at what you make afterwards. Is photosynthesis a physical or chemical change? Provide evidence from your diagram to support your claim. And that's it. Make sure to watch the video till the end. Y'all already know. Log into Illuminate, take the energy and photosynthesis exit ticket. I do want to kind of plug in here. When you're done with your Edpuzzle, it would be so amazing if you could please go back to the assignment on Google Classroom and just go ahead and click mark as done. I know it's going to give you some sort of message where it's like you didn't actually attach anything, blah, blah, blah. You can still go ahead and submit it. This just, again, it just makes it easier for me to see who has done and looked at the Illuminate puzzle, the Edpuzzle video, so that I can just follow up with people that might be a little bit behind or that might need some help. I really enjoyed our lesson today. I hope you did too. I will see you, or you will hear from me again next week. Bye.